I would always go to the crime scene. Because you can't replicate a crime scene in photographs. In the kitchen, there were obvious signs of trauma, but there had been it'd been painted over as if somebody has been trying to cover up a crime scene. When they put in the UV lights, it then sort of lit up to say that something very, very violent has happened here. I grew up on a council estate and I was surrounded by quite a lot of crime. When you're a kid in that sort of environment, you see things, you do things. Joining the police was like one of the last things I would have thought I would have ended up doing. When I left school, I sort of in one of those kind of I'm going to get out of this situation type moves, I decided to become an accountant. And I was training doing that, and it was so boring. I was so bored doing it that I felt like I needed to do something else. And our office was backed onto the Old Bailey, and I could see the comings and goings. And it was around the time of IRA terrorists getting tried there. So there were blue lights and sirens and stopping the traffic. And I'm sat there trying to work out why two columns don't add up. And I'm looking out and seeing all this excitement, and I'm thinking there's got to be more to life than this. And then I saw an advert on the tube. I thought, no, I'm going to go for it. When I got posted, my first police station was actually to where I used to live, and I grew up and I went to school. So you can imagine I came across a lot of the people that I knew, and I'm not going to say it wasn't difficult. I was 20 years old and I was arresting people that I went to school with, so you can imagine some of the names and the abuse that I got. But what it did was it gave me an advantage, I think, over the other police there, because some of them are coming from different countries, from Wales, from Scotland, little villages from God knows where. But I grew up in the area that I was policing, so I knew the criminals. And if I didn't know them personally, I knew the type of person they were. So I could be driving down the street and I could spot a wrong on a mile off, because just by the way they walk or just the way they act, I could just tell, because I'd spent my whole life around them. When I grew up on an estate, I knew what was going on. So I used to go and speak to the kids, just a casual, what's going on in the area. And you'd be surprised how many of them will just say, oh, yeah, you know, Jack across the road, yeah, no, he's been stealing cars, or something like that, or so-and-so selling drugs. So just by talking to the kids, and I'm not trying to turn them into grasses or anything, but just trying to get a feel of what's going on in the area. And quite often you'd end up getting a bit of information that could then take you towards solving a crime. And I think when you do that, it sort of drags you down a route of being a detective, because that's just the natural progression. I want to catch a bad guy. Being a detective allows you to catch the worst bad guys. So even though when I first joined, that wasn't my ultimate goal to be a detective, I think naturally I was drawn towards it.
You, in your early career, worked in counterterrorism for the Met. Tell me a bit about how you ended up doing that and that experience.
One of the biggest cases, and undoubtedly one of the most scariest cases that I dealt with, was it was an Al-Qaeda cell. And so essentially the way it came to us is we were working with MI5 and Special Branch. They would do like the follows, the surveillance, and we'd be behind them at a short distance. And if we needed to come forward to arrest, that was our job, to arrest, search, interview and all that. So we ended up starting this operation on this cell, this terrorist cell. We brought them into Paddington Police Station, and terrorists you can interview for 14 days. So we knew we were going to have them for a while. And in a garage of one of the people who had been arrested was a hard drive. And on the hard drive was something called the Gas Limos Project. And that was their words for this document that they'd put together. And it was the scariest document I've ever read in my life. And essentially it was their research, their reconnaissance and everything into a number of different plots they had, terrorists, to carry out these terrorist attacks. Now, to give you examples of some of the things that they had planned. So it was called the Gas Limos Project. And that's because one of the plans was to get limousines, fill them up with the sort of big gas canisters you use on barbecues, drive that under a building and explode it with the intention of then collapsing the building. So that was one of the plots. Another was to put a bomb on the underground system. I'm a South Londoner. This was a station near to where I grew up in Greenwich. The North Greenwich station is sort of under the Thames. The idea being that if that collapsed, it would then flood the whole underground system. Another was to derail the Heathrow Express at the point where one was coming towards another, so that they derailed, crashed into each other, and obviously causing carnage. These were all plans that they had in the UK. And running parallel with that, they had some plans in America. And one of the bits of information that came back from one of the houses was the download of someone's phone. And they gave us the videos to have a look through to see what was on there. And the one I was interviewing, I was looking at this video that he had in New York. And we know that they'd been to New York to do the reconnaissance on the buildings out there. And he was filming across Hudson Bay, the river that goes through New York. And as he was filming across Hudson Bay, he's sort of panning across, and he stops, and it's the Twin Towers, and they're there. So we know it must be pre 9/11. And as he pans across, he stops, and you hear, and the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I was like, play that again. What have I just seen? And we played it again. And it was such a chilling moment to know that they were there in New York pre 9/11 and knew that this was going to happen, which made you really realise that these are serious people. These aren't playing. These are like really, really in the know when it comes to Al-Qaeda. So they're the kind of people that you're interviewing, and it's quite scary what they had planned.
And you, one of the officers who responded to the 2005 London terrorist attacks. What was that experience like, and what do you remember of that day?
So we were on call. It was a Thursday morning, and it was quite early. We were in our office, and on the news, some bits came through that there was something going on the underground. And I think they were reporting it as like power surges or something. And then we got a phone call to us saying there's been a bomb. And then we get another few phone calls saying that there's multiple bombs. We were dispatched to Edgware Road, and we were the first ones from the anti-terrorist branch to get there. And we basically stayed there for 2 weeks. We never left once we got there. And our job was basically to deal with that crime scene, to make sure if there was any evidence there, that it would be taken, found and retrieved. Our first job was to remove the bodies of the victims. So we couldn't go straight down. There was some process you have to go through to make sure there's no secondary device, no chemical, biological, anything like that down there. So when we went down, we had 7 victims there. And it was really quite surreal. We had no idea at the time it was a suicide bomber. There'd never been any suicide bombings up until that point. So we were on the train, and I vividly remember seeing one of the victims who I thought at the time, and I remember saying, "Look at this poor sod." There was literally nothing left of them apart from what was wrapped around the innards of the train. And it was only a little while later we realised that was the bomber. So it was my job to retrieve what was left of his remains. So it was I ain't gonna lie, it was a difficult time, because then what we had to do, we had to basically, you're on our hands and knees for 2 weeks, collecting everything that was on that train, everything that was on the track. It was a bomb on a packed underground train, so you can imagine what we were finding there. So that was the most difficult thing to do in my career. I don't want to go into details of what we were finding, but I leave it up to your imagination of what we were finding down there. But on the second Sunday, we stopped what we were doing because the victims' families had come down to lay flowers to pay their respects, and that was the only time where it got to me, because we stood back and watched, and you realise then that they're not just nameless victims, their daughters, their brothers, their sons. You know what I mean? They're real people, and I found that really difficult, which really reflected later on when I started to deal with murders. What I found more difficult when I was investigating murders, it was dealing with the families and their emotion more than the crime scenes themselves.
Why did you start to investigate murders?
As a detective, I'd always been trying to catch the worst criminals you can catch. So I'd done every kind of investigation you could think of, from robberies, burglaries, serious sexual offences. I'd done terrorism. The one I hadn't done was murder. So for me, it was a natural progression that at some point in my career, I'm going to investigate murder. It's like I found my calling in life. It was a job that I think it was after the first conviction I got at court. When I'd been through the process, the court process, been there with the family and seen the trauma that murder causes them, seen the pain that at that very early stage when you're with them and they've just found out that their loved one has gone, from that very early stage, and you're on the horrible journey that is the investigation, the court process and everything that goes with it. To be there when that guilty verdict come in and see how that impact that family, for me it was like, I can't do anything else now. There's nothing in the police that's going to replicate doing this to get that job satisfaction, that personal satisfaction of helping that family.
And when you approach a murder investigation, how do you begin? Where do you start?
The simplest thing when you're starting murder investigations, there are questions that you need to answer. Who is the victim? And that's the most important question to answer first, because most murders, there's a link between the killer and the victim. And there's a saying in murder investigation, to understand how a person died, you have to understand how they lived. So the first thing you need to do is understand who your victim is. And you build up a picture of them and their life. And there's a good chance that there will be someone or something within their life that will give you an indication of to why it is that they've been murdered. But then you have to answer questions, how did they die? Who did it? Where did it happen? When did it happen? So if you break it down really simply about you're trying to answer those questions and address those, if you can answer those questions, you'll solve the crime.
What mistakes do murderers make?
When it comes to murders, essentially there are two types. You've got those that are spontaneous events and those that are planned. They're very, very different in terms of solving them. Now, if there's a spontaneous event, the killer hasn't thought about things like the CCTV cameras have walked past. They've probably got a phone in their pocket, which gives away lots of information in terms of who they've been in contact with, the cell sites they've used, so you can see where they've been. Their clothing that they're wearing, they're going to be covered in the victim's blood potentially, the victim's DNA, etc. So those spontaneous events where no planning has gone into a murder, it then becomes very difficult for the killer to then get rid of all that evidence. So you can't affect CCTV. Your phone, what a lot of killers do, is they then try and get rid of their phone. I'll tell you what, I've got this phone in my pocket, I've just killed someone, I'll get rid of the phone. Well, there's a big red flag there, isn't there? You've had a phone for 6 months and suddenly you stop using it just after someone's been murdered. Well, that's a bit of a clue there, isn't it? People get caught because everywhere we go nowadays, we leave a footprint behind us, be it CCTV, phones, people seeing us, our card usage, whatever it is, and you can't cover that up afterwards. And then you've got the other type of murder, ones that are planned. But then even those people that plan it, their planning can give them away. So I've caught murderers before where they've actually decided that, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave my phone at home. Well, you never leave your phone at home. Why is it suddenly at home now? So when we get information that you might be the killer and your phone's at home but we can show you over there, well, that shows some kind of premeditated intent. I had one crime where it was an execution, essentially. It was a motorbike, got pulled up next to a car. There were 2 people on the motorbike and the passenger on the back pointed a gun in the car and shot and killed the front seat passenger. And what they'd done, they put some blue tape over the registration number of the bike. And we'll get away with it now, they can't see a registration number. One of them was wearing a yellow helmet. So we went through all the CCTV that we could find from petrol stations, everything we could, from a motorbike with someone with a yellow helmet. And lo and behold, we find it coming out of a petrol station, having just filled up with petrol, no blue tape, we see the registration number. They think they're clever, but I think often they underestimate what the police do and what they can do.
Did you, during your time investigating murders, often go to the crime scenes themselves?
I would always go to the crime scene because you can't replicate a crime scene in photographs or in videos. You have to go there to sort of live and breathe it. Unless you're in it, you can't understand it. And when you're in there, so one of the things I used to do that I found really, really helpful at a crime scene, is just to stand and look. When you go to a crime scene, especially those early stages, it can be chaos. There's lots going on. But sometimes the best thing you can do, the most productive thing you can do is just stop and just look and just try and take in what it is you're seeing. What can I read from this crime scene, be it the blood distribution, the way the victims acted, the way the suspects acted, what is going on in the room? Is there something overturned? Is there a drawer open? Anything you can read in the room to try and give you a clue, an understanding of what was happening at the time the murder happened. And you can't get that from photographs. You have to actually be at the crime scene to do that.
Are there any crime scenes that you can kind of still really remember?
I never found crime scenes difficult to deal with. Not the physical side of it, the blood, the bodies and all that kind of stuff. That never affected me, apart from one, and that was when it was children. When you see a parent that's lost a child and you're sat with them, everything inside you just wants to say to them that we're going to solve this for you. We'll catch them. You can't do that. One time I did. I was sat opposite this family, a really lovely family. Their son had just been murdered, and I found myself saying to them, "We'll get them." And as soon as I said it, I wanted to put the words back in my mouth, because I can't promise that, because I don't know, I can't guarantee. But I was so caught up in their emotion, so caught up in their trauma, and what I wanted to do was cuddle them and just say, look, we'll make it all right. But the words came out, we'll catch them. Thankfully we did.
You worked on the murder case and investigation of Sian Blake. Can you tell me a bit about that case? What happened? When you're on a murder investigation team, it's not just murders that you deal with. There are other things, including high-risk missing people. We were on call. It was just after Christmas. I think it was January time, and I was aware because of in the press and the media, there was an EastEnders actress, Sian Blake. She was born Sian, but she called herself Sian, so out of respect, we call her Sian. And she'd been missing, and with her 2 young children. So I was aware that this was going on. Then a call came in to us as the murder team to say, look, that we've got real concerns that some harm may have come to them. And it came in on a Saturday. And although you're aware of what's going on, you don't really know the details. And when I saw the report and when we saw what was going on, we all were like, this isn't right. This isn't just a missing persons case. And I think one of the big things for us was that Sian had motor neuron disease, which meant that she could really just about look after herself. And what had happened is the police had gone there as a welfare check, and her husband had said that she had left with the 2 boys, Zachary and Amon, and that she had needed to get some space or see some friends or something. It just didn't sit right. She couldn't look after herself. How could she look after herself and these 2 young boys? So we decided that we were now going to treat it as a murder unless proven otherwise. So we went back to her house, and a colleague of mine went in, and one of the first things they noticed was in the kitchen there were obvious signs of trauma, but there had been it'd been painted over as if somebody has been trying to cover up a crime scene. When they put in the UV lights, it then sort of lit up to say that something very, very violent has happened here. So from that moment, we were convinced that Sian had been murdered, because when you look at the circumstances, when you look at gone in the kitchen, it was almost certainly that some harm had come to her. But what about the boys? I mean, why would the father hurt the boys? So we always had this hope that he'd put them somewhere. So we were trying to, where would he take them? We went to his mum's home. They weren't there. We were trying to find where he was, where the boys were. And then I think it was the Tuesday morning, so about 4 days we'd been investigating this, going through the home, etc. Got to the point of searching the garden. And we brought in cadaver dogs, human remains dogs. And they started to make some indications in the garden, which meant we then had to excavate the soil. And yeah, it takes a long time. You're not just digging a hole. You have to take things out very, very slowly. So we were back at the police station, and then we get a phone call came through from my colleagues at the scene saying they'd found a grave, and in the grave was Sian and the 2 boys. And I think for me, it's probably one of the lowest points of my career. To have that hope that you have that acceptance that something's happened to Sian, but you have that hope that not the boys. Why would he hurt the boys?
But when we got that phone call, it was horrible to know that he had done that to them. And then when the post-mortems happen, and you see the way in which they were killed, and that the last thing they would have seen is their dad brutally attacking them in the way he did was awful. But then it comes down to, as bad as that is, I can do something positive here, and it was my job to catch him. And I knew from looking at CCTV and looking at his phone that he'd fled to Africa. Because it was such high profile, the fact he had gone to Africa, that allowed us then in there to start to get information from mostly ex-Brits in Africa who saw him on New Year's Eve. He was partying. He was dancing on New Year's Eve like nothing had ever happened, even though he just killed his wife and kids and buried them in the garden. But what that allowed us is to sort of then hone in on him, and eventually I got the local police to go there, and he was arrested and brought back to the country. And he pleaded guilty to their murders, and rightly so, was given a whole life sentence, so he'll never get out of prison.
How did you feel when he was given that sentence?
It was the right sentence, it should have happened. I don't think there was no real, sometimes you'd be at these trials and you feel this sense of satisfaction that justice is served. It doesn't feel like it ever was because there was no trial. You never got to see his side of it. Why did he do it? What made him kill his wife and kids in that way? So it was it felt like a bit of a hollow justice for us, I think. Certainly for me, anyway.
How much do your personal feelings come into dealing with potential murderers? I mean, do you ever feel strong feelings of like anger towards them, I suppose?
You're dealing with people who are prepared and have committed the most despicable acts. Taking someone's life. There's no worse crime than murdering someone, taking their life. And you feel, on a human level, you can't not feel something towards them because of the professional way in which you work. Certainly for me, I was able to channel that into determination. When you're investigating a murder, it can have a real impact on you and your life. So murder isn't a 9-to-5 job. You don't turn up and you say, oh, it's 5 o'clock now, we need to go home. Well, no, you keep working, you might be working till 2 o'clock in the morning and then you're back in at 7, and you might do that for weeks on end. That feeling you have towards the killer themselves, the feeling you have for the family and the responsibility you feel for them, it's that drives you. It certainly drove me in that, okay, I'm not seeing my own family. The bags under my eyes are just getting bigger and bigger. I'm not sleeping, my health's probably suffering. But it's that drive that you get from, I think, from both sides, the